Hey guys, and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Ceci, and today I'm going to be decorating cakes from start to finish. This is one of those calming, no rush decorating videos, so feel free to relax, grab a coffee, or decorate along with me. Today you're going to be seeing a little bit of what it's like to be in the shoes of a baker. So as you saw, I already prepped my coffee. Coffee is a must for a baker. Then I start by prepping all my fillings that I need for the cake. So today I actually only needed the strawberry filling. The strawberry filling, I like to make it from scratch. And that's just a mixture of water, sugar, cornstarch, and strawberries. Then while that's cooking, I start to make my buttercream. So I already have my buttercream prepped. I forgot to record it, but it's all ready to go. So I started on this heart-shaped birthday cake for one of my customers. So she wanted a vanilla cake with strawberry filling. So I'm just making a little dam right here. You always want to make a little dam or a border around the outline of your cake. That way no filling spills out. This is especially important for fruit fillings or any runnier fillings. If it's a filling that's not so watery or like juicy, such as like chocolate ganache, then you can skip this step. But for fruit fillings, I definitely make sure that I do this little border or a dam. Then I like to make sure that the fruit filling, or any filling really, is spread out evenly. That way everyone gets a bite of the filling. And so as you can see here, I created a dam, put the filling in, and then made an extra border for an extra layer of protection. Then I put the second cake layer on top, and I made a border around the like in between the layers of the cakes, just to give it that extra layer of protection so no filling comes out. Because what happens when you start decorating, you put buttercream on top of the cake and it weighs down that first, or I guess that top layer, and squishes out the filling, and it's really hard to put it back together. So I just do this as a safety precaution. Then as you can see here, I am just kind of spreading out a thin layer of buttercream around my cake. This is just a crumb coat. So I do the crumb coat and I refrigerate it for at least 10 minutes. And then as you can see here, I am working on the final coat. So the reason why I do a crumb coat is to lock in all the crumbs, and that way I don't have a messy outer shell when I am doing my final coat. I'm sure if any of you have ever decorated a cake, you'll notice that you get cake crumbs all over your cake when it's time to frost. So to avoid this, I do two things. One is the crumb coat, and two, I do like to work with frozen cakes. So what I do is while my cakes are baking, I make a sugar syrup on the stove. So it's equal parts of water and sugar. Then you boil it up in a saucepan, and then you wait for the sugar to dissolve. Once the sugar dissolves, then you're gonna turn off your stove, and then you're gonna let that cool completely. So it takes about maybe like 15 to 20 minutes for it to cool completely. Then my cakes, when they are done baking, I let them cool for about 5 minutes, and then I flip them over onto a sheet of, or a layer of plastic wrap, and then I just drizzle on, or use a pastry brush to drizzle on the sugar syrup on top of the cake. And you want to do this while the cake is still a little bit warm, because you want it to fully absorb all that sugar syrup. And I do this just to give it an extra layer of protection for the cake, so it doesn't get any freezer burn. So then I wrap up my cakes once I fully soaked the cakes with the sugar syrup. I wrap up my cakes with the plastic wrap, and then I put it in a freezer Ziploc bag. Then I put it in the freezer and I freeze it for at least 4 hours, but you can definitely freeze your cakes up to a month. And that is very helpful information to know, because baking a cake and decorating on the same day is a lot of work. So personally, I like to bake my cakes the day before, or maybe even a few days before, and then freeze them up, and then I'll decorate on a different day, because it is just way too much. So when I found out about this freezing technique, I was definitely a little hesitant on doing this because I was afraid that my cakes would dry out, because I know that in the fridge they dry out, so I thought maybe in the freezer they would dry out even more. And this is actually not true. It actually keeps the moisture nice and intact, and the sugar syrup just adds that extra moisture. So what happens is that when your cake comes out of the freezer, it starts to thaw out, and it has little like ice crystals, right? Because of the sugar syrup. So once those ice crystals melt, it just becomes so nice and moist. So I definitely recommend freezing your cakes, not only for that extra moisture, but also to help avoid cake crumbs. And it's a lot easier to move your cake around, or like to frost it without your cake sliding everywhere and just kind of wiggling everywhere. So definitely one tip to remember. And this is something I didn't start doing until maybe like 2 years after I started baking like cakes professionally. And this was a huge, huge, huge lifesaver. So I will never look back. On this heart cake, she wanted to add some bows. I love adding bows on heart cakes. I think that just gives it like a really cute touch and a very like dainty addition to the heart cake. So I love doing that. Anytime you add bows or any other accents or like sprinkles, you want to make sure that you do this right after you frost, because you want your frosting to be like not wet but soft. You want your frosting to be soft, that way everything sticks. So when you try to add sprinkles onto a cake that's already been in the refrigerator, it's really hard for the sprinkles to stick. They won't stick naturally. You'll kind of have to like push them in and force them to stick, which will risk your like the shape of your border or your buttercream. It'll start to kind of like split. So I'll definitely avoid doing that. Try to remember to put your accents and your sprinkles while your cake frosting is still soft. So next we're gonna move on to a Spider-Man cake. So this customer wanted a cake that resembled Spider-Man's face. So the whole cake is gonna be red, and then we're gonna draw Spider-Man's eyes, and then obviously the web around it. And I'm not gonna lie, putting the web on the entire cake was a little challenging because I had just never done that. So what I did is I drew a web on one side, and then on the other half of the cake drew another web, and then just attached them together. That was probably the easiest technique for me. So before you add any designs, you can see that I'm cleaning up my board. Once you have your final coat, you want to clean up your board, because after you put on your extra designs and details, it gets a lot harder to clean up that board. I remember when I first started, I was very intimidated by doing like character cakes, just because those are very detailed cakes, and it just gets a little bit like intimidating to do those, because you know you want it to look exactly like the character. So to make it easier for myself, what I did was I decided I wasn't going to be using a fondant to cover the cake. I am solely a buttercream based bakery. So I make that very clear to my customers who want a custom cake that is a character cake, which actually works out great because a lot of customers don't even like the taste of fondant. So a lot of customers, at least my customers, have preferred me to use buttercream rather than cover the cake in fondant. It's just a different animal, and I just don't deal with it. So I do use fondant accents, and you'll see later on a cake that I'll make with fondant accents, but I don't like to cover the cake with fondant. It's more expensive for the customer too, and it's a lot more difficult, and it's gonna stress you out. So if you're not very like comfortable with fondant, just make it clear to your customers that you do not work with fondant, and I promise you most of the time they'll be okay with it, as long as you can make the buttercream look smooth and clean. So next I'm working on a dinosaur cake. So this customer wanted vanilla and a strawberry filling, very popular combination and delicious. So I'm just applying the layers and adding the filling to the cake and washing my hands in between. As a baker, you wash your hands a lot. So I definitely recommend a good lotion to use, because your hands are going to be dry with all the washing. I do use gloves as well, but it just depends. If I'm touching the cake, I use gloves, and if I'm just kind of like putting the buttercream on, then I'm not really using gloves, but my hands still get dirty because the buttercream sometimes comes up from the bag, or you know, handling the spatula and stuff. It gets messy, okay? So here I'm just applying a light layer of buttercream. This is going to be my crumb coat. So I'm locking in all those crumbs so they don't get in the way later on when I'm doing my final coat. Then you want to stick this in the refrigerator for at least 10 minutes. And then now I have started on my final coat. So it's going to be a pink dinosaur cake. And this is the cake that we're actually going to be using fondant little figures. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that you clean your board before you start on the detail of the cake. So here I'm just mixing up my colors that I need for the little fondant figures. So whenever I'm using fondant, I like to use a moisturizer so my fondant doesn't dry out. So in this case, I'm using vegetable shortening, just some Crisco. Works fine. A lot of people use, different things, right? But I found that Crisco or a vegetable shortening works the best for me. So then I'm using gel food coloring to color up all my little figures. And so I am making some leaves. So I am rolling out my dough, or not my dough, but my fondant. And then I'm going to be cutting out some leaves using some simple cookie cutters. And then I'm also making some rocks, pebbles, and some little eggs. So I'm also attaching my cake toppers. So there's some toppers that you can see, like I'm putting in the front of the cake. So all I do, because my cake is already hard, right? Because I put it in the fridge. All I do is put some buttercream behind the toppers and just stick it on there. Another tip, so the reason why I like to use vegetable shortening for my fondant is not only to hydrate it, but it also makes it easier to stick on the cake since it's kind of like already sticky from the Crisco. All I have to do is cut out my little shape and then stick it on my cake, and it sticks on perfectly. I don't need to use like an edible glue or like vodka some people use or anything like that. I just use the stickiness from the Crisco. So that is a good tip, and it's very useful. One really useful tool to have in cake decorating is a mini spatula like the one I have in my hand, because it's just useful for so many things. But in this case, I'm using it to move my little leaf around because the cookie cutter that I was using was a little tricky because they're kind of like the Hawaiian leaves. So those can be, for some reason, tricky to move around. And so obviously I don't want to dip my finger in the fondant and in the cake. So I'm using the little spatula to help me move things around. Then I'm just adding in the final details, so like the cake toppers on top, the little pebbles, and then the eggs, and just pulling it all together. Then for a little fun extra detail, I used some of the green that I had left over, some buttercream, and I just used my leaf piping tip and I drew some like realistic grass on top of the cake, like where the dinosaur is and where the pebbles are, and then also on the bottom. So that's cute. Then after this cake was finished, I started working on a cupcake and cake combo for another customer. So it was his son's birthday and he wanted to surprise him with WWE cupcakes and cake. So the cupcakes were actually for his classroom. He wanted to take them to his school and have the other students enjoy the cupcakes with him to celebrate his birthday. And then the cake was for his home party. So here I'm just making the logo with buttercream. So black, red, and then some white for the logo. And then I got started on the cake. So he wanted a cake that replicated like a belt, like a wrestling belt. So what I did is I had a 2-layered round cake. It was a 8-inch, and then I used a smaller 6-inch cake, cut it in half, and then those were gonna be the sides for the belt. So I don't remember the flavor of this cake, but I think it was lemon and vanilla filling, or sorry, not lemon and vanilla filling, lemon and raspberry filling, or vanilla and raspberry filling. But I already kind of stacked the middle layer, and then now I'm just stacking and filling the outer layers, which is going to be like the sides of the belt. So I'm just putting those 2 layers together, and then I'm just gonna cut the 6-inch cake in half and then attach it to the sides of the bigger cake. And then I'm just filling in the little gaps with some buttercream, and then I'm just gonna frost the rest of the cake with black buttercream. So notice how the buttercream is pretty black. It's pretty hard to achieve a black buttercream as a starting baker. A lot of, I made the mistake where I didn't even know how to decorate. I mean, not decorate, color black buttercream. And so I just used a heck ton of black food coloring and thought that that was going to be my solution. And unfortunately, it was not. It turned out to be like a gray color. So what I do, another tip for you, is I use black cacao powder to color the buttercream first, just some regular white buttercream. And then I use some good quality black food coloring. So I like to use either a Mary color or even the one from Hobby Lobby, works really good. As long as you start off with the base of the cacao powder, just put maybe like 1/4 of a cup inside the buttercream, and that should darken it really good. And then you just put the black gel food coloring in there and it should be nice and black. What you could also do if you don't have access to black cacao powder, and I, by the way, get mine on Amazon, you could just make the black buttercream a few days in advance. And there's a lot of techniques to get like a really, really dark, deep color. But that's the easiest one for me because a lot of the time, let's be honest, we're not gonna prep our buttercream a few days before, okay? Let's be honest. So that's just one thing that I like to do for the black buttercream. So anyways, I had asked my cake topper lady to make this belt, and she did a terrific job. It was the perfect size for the cake. So I just put it right on top, and then I kind of bent the sides a little bit just to make it more realistic. And now I'm just writing happy birthday on the board, and writing with buttercream is another animal. It took me many years to practice this, and I feel like I still am practicing a little bit. I cannot do all the fonts so easily. I know I make it look easy right here, but trust me, it's taken me a few years. But that's it. That's the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.